Well, good morning again, Donal, all the way up in there in Bonnie, Scotland. And I see, Donal, you still haven't got a Christmas tree behind you. What's going on there, my friend?
Um,
Come on, get into the festive season. Okay.
Enough said.
I want to see a Christmas hat on you next time
Oh,
we do
really?
this. Actually, we both wear one. I've got a Christmas jumper on. See, look.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting into the spirit of things, the real essence of how Donal and I feel um, and think about current situations. So today, we're going to touch upon genuine financial freedom. We're going to touch upon, is it worth having gold and silver versus Bitcoin? We're going to talk about how what have the authorities, i.e. governments, really got planned for us? And do we, as a collective, go along with it? Now, when I talk about collective, I mean, all the billions of us on the planet thinking essentially and feeling essentially the way we really want things to pan out, because things don't have to play out the way that those who believe they're in authority, i.e. governments, want them to play out. But of course, within the collective consciousness, there is always a tipping point. We haven't reached that tipping point yet for all that is good to roll out. We're quite a long way from that tipping point. But nevertheless, those of us who encourage everyone to really look at what's happening in the world. And by that, I mean what's happening with your own finances in your own bank account. That's your world. What's happening when you go out into the marketplace, what people are saying, that's your world. What your neighbor says, what you agree with, what you don't agree with. What you see on the supermarket shelves, that's your world. That's my world. So let's come right back to where we're at, right here, right now, in our world, our small corner of the world, because that's where it will play out. So, Donal, I know you've got a lot to share on genuine financial freedom. I know you've got thoughts on gold and silver versus Bitcoin versus crypto versus digital coins. So, yeah, over to you, my friend, till I interrupt you.
Okay, thanks, Hazel. Yeah, it's everything's getting very interesting, isn't it? We certainly are in interesting times. There's no question about that. And I think for those of us who have, we're minded to inquire as to what's going on and look behind the scenes and look towards what might be happening next. What is really happening in my understanding, having been doing this and doing this kind of analysis for quite a long time now, is simply the rolling out of an agenda, and by the global powers, and you can put all sorts of badges and labels on them. Whether it's your governments, your local governments, the World Economic Forum, the European Central Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations. I mean, these are all just kind of current representations of globalist mentality and globalist agenda and
Yeah.
globalist ethos. And what has been really challenging, over the past couple of decades, certainly, has been to address these issues in a logical, dispassionate way, without becoming fearful and finding ways of talking about them without just being branded as being a conspiracy theorist. And this has been the real challenge for me, because when I've discovered that things aren't the way that we've been told they were, so I start looking into it. And then I discover, some really disingenuous things, machinations behind the scenes, which have gone way, way back. You can go right back to the Bretton Woods Agreement and beforehand, but certainly the latest phase of the monetary cycle was formulated at the Bretton Woods Agreement, in 1944. So you're looking at a very long time scale that these globalists have been thinking and planning and strategizing, to get us to the point that we are right now. And ultimately, that is a very, very heavily controlled technocracy where we are essentially, the assets of the state.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for people who haven't come across this notion to realistically and objectively appraise what's going on, because it all just seems to be coming out of nowhere, when in fact it has quite obviously been scripted, and they've published it and they've talked about it. It's been in the
Yeah.
press for
Donal,
a
can
long
I,
time.
sorry to interrupt, but this is one of those times when I want to interrupt it. It's appropriate to say it here. I had a video sent to me that I have yet been able to share. And you say this has been scripted a long, long time. Now, in this video, which I hope to get onto YouTube and onto social media, it is if you fold the US dollars, 10, 20, 50, $100 into like an aeroplane that a child would throw, a paper aeroplane. Since 1996, new dollars, new paper money has come out. If you fold it in a certain way from 1996, and it makes me, it shows the Twin Towers. Then in the next dollar up, it shows the Twin Towers with a cloud over it. In the next value of monetary dollar, it shows the Twin Towers gone. And then, and I think it's the $100 bill, might be the 50, but don't quote me, but I hope to post this video. It shows, if you fold it the correct way, a face with a mask with 2020 underneath it. Now, from my perspective with divine law, that we live in polarity, as we all know, when we come to this system called the earth. Polarity means opposites, and we've come to experience the opposite and deal with it. And some of us want to blend it together and go forward. And what that means is that divine law states that not even the darkness can keep everything hidden. So it's all in plain view when you know how to access it. But there's always someone on the planet that will access the clues that the darkness, and I'm calling it darkness because it's the opposite of what we want. No one wants to talk about the mask on, do they? No one wanted the Twin Towers to fall down. And it is divine law, because everything is governed by divinity, even the darkness. This is my perception now, away from logic. Some would call it abstract. But when you see it in plain view with dollars folded a certain way, the darkness has to reveal their agenda. So it's with eyes wide open we're talking about this today on this call. So yeah, I'm not sorry for interrupting, because I wanted to get that bit in, because that was a wow moment for me, Donal, to see that this chap had folded these dollars and shown the story from 1996, which goes, your research goes a lot further. I know when this was first scripted was way before 1996. So yeah.
Yeah, and one of the real challenges here is that it's not just a rabbit hole, it's an absolute warren of avenues that you can go down when you start tugging at these threads. And if you've not come to it over a period of time, it all simply becomes absolutely overwhelming. It's like being confronted with an entirely new language that you've never countenanced before, and suddenly being expected to make sense of it and being told what it means and what the implications are, but you just don't know how to read the language. But symbology and numerology are absolutely key to the way that this global elite operates. Mm-hmm. And you can take it right back. You can go back thousands of years with this. And I don't want to go deeply into that because it's not directly relevant to what we're talking about here. But it's important to have a historical context for what's going on here. And up to and including the fact that, we have been through in the past couple of centuries so many global wars and regional wars. There have been what have effectively been sacrifices throughout the world wars. The Twin Towers itself, was a ritualistic sacrifice. There is so much that has been scripted along the lines of death and genocide. And it's a horrible thing to have to come to terms with. but the same guys that orchestrated all of that are still in charge.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So why would anybody think that what they've got scripted for us now is any different to the absolute insanity and psychopathy that they've foisted upon, humanity, for the past however long?
Yeah.
And without wanting to really go too much into it, there is this, we touched on at the start, this whole idea of belief in authority, external authority versus your innate sovereignty, your own knowledge. And this is absolutely key.
Yeah. You're right. So we are, as you rightly said, we're all an asset of the state. And why people don't get wise to this, it was for me, it was, Donal, in those early days when I started to uncover so much, I couldn't believe it. It was, I just can't believe that. That was on a superficial level, but deep down, there's that something within you that thinks, my God, this is true. Things are not what they seem. So let's talk about, we've said about, the history of it, and it is doom and gloom if we get stuck into that too much. But thankfully, both you and I were not emotionally attached to that. We've done our research. We've got angry, we've got confused, we've got filled with doubt, but now we are not. We are not confused. So let's talk about taking control.
Yeah, there's one point I'd like to touch on that just picks up from exactly what you said there, Hazel, and this is with regards to this whole kind of conspiracy thing, because it's the word on everyone's lips at the moment. It's become such a cliched thing. Yeah. But what we have to bear in mind is that it goes back, in fact, right back to the Jesuit oath that I referenced a couple of chats ago, yeah. Where essentially they, the way that they work is that when the people need a hero, they will provide that hero. But what they will often do is to discredit that hero by providing false information along with the truth. So what we've ended up with, in the so-called truth movement is a high degree of exposure and a high degree of elucidation of relevant facts with some really, really bad disinformation, which then discredits what is being said. So your main stage players, you could talk about David Icke, you could talk about Alex Jones, all these guys, characters who've been on the stage for so long, talking about a lot of these things, they have been so ridiculed that even the things they're talking about, which, do stand scrutiny, are being dismissed by everybody because of the ridiculous things that they've said and gone on. And that's what I've come to understand as being controlled opposition. So, they create the problem, then they have the controlled opposition. Yeah. And what we have to do is to use our own powers of discernment in order to evaluate, as you said, dispassionately, absolutely unemotionally, and only looking at the facts of the matter, but using intuition. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge distinction here between fear-driven emotion and intuition.
Yeah. Sorry, Donal. I really want to get this across as well, because this is dear to my heart. Emotion is not intuition. Emotion is not the deep feeling knowing of the heart. Emotion is simply a reaction to a thought you have had. And so that's what we're talking about when we say keep emotionally detached from having an emotional reaction to a thought that you have. Because real feeling, real intuition comes from the heart, and it is stable. It keeps us stable and centered. So if you are listening to any of this and doing your own research and you wobble or you have a knee-jerk reaction, then you are coming from, I'm going to say, the wrong place to understand all of this and to be able to act out in reality what you want. Okay, thank you, Donal, for letting me say that.
No, absolutely.
It's so important. So important.
It's so important, because when we become confronted with these things, and this is what I really struggled with to start with, because there is so much in the alternative media which is driving fear, and whether they're ranting about 5G or ranting about the dangers of vaccinations or ranting about the collapse of the economy, or the way that it's presented is designed to stimulate fear in people. Now, the issues and the subjects themselves, need to be studied objectively and may or may not be found to a greater or lesser extent to have validity. But that is the scrutiny process that it behooves us all to engage in without buying into the fear. And so what I've, and especially since this whole COVID thing kicked off, I mean, it's really escalated my own research into what's going on. And I find myself falling for some of the narratives, for some of the stories that were being put out there and getting drawn into the fear cycle, which is completely and utterly counterproductive to our ends of bringing about a really positive scenario out of this chaos. So what I came across was an idea, which the idea that there are basically three truths. There's the lie, there is the controlled version of the truth, and then there is the real truth. And I've been on a journey of originally believing the lies and then getting sucked into the controlled opposition and believing what they had to tell me about what was going on, and then using my own discernment going, hang on a minute, that's not right. And finding objectively for myself, my understanding. And that's really the perspective that I'm bringing to the table here when I'm applying it to my life, to my finances, to my business, to my family, is as having identified what I am absolutely comfortable with in terms of my understanding.
Yeah. So can we start then with money again, because that is crucial. And can we say a little bit about gold and silver versus cryptocurrency versus digital coins? What are you doing? What am I doing with regards to that? And, our perception of it, really. So let's talk about that. People say, should I get gold? Should I get silver? I don't know what to do. People are all over the place.
And it's a brilliant place to start, because gold and silver, obviously, for hundreds, thousands of years, have represented the intrinsic value of the earth. There's not a finite supply, but it's increasingly scarce and increasingly difficult to get. It requires a lot of work in order to actually mine and to mint it. So that has always been the case, and you can go back to as I referenced earlier, the Bretton Woods Agreement, when the American dollar, the US dollar, was set to be the global's currency, but tied to gold at $35 an ounce. And that was the agreement. And basically the whole notion of being good as gold is the fact that the dollar could be redeemed for gold. And there was great confidence in that. It actually provided a platform and stability for a lot of growth and economic prosperity, regardless of the politics. You can look at the success in that post-war era of economic growth. And then we got to 1971, and basically the US military exploits around the world had overextended themselves, and they didn't have enough gold to redeem for other countries that were holding US dollars. They couldn't do it, so they had to detach the dollar from gold. And at that point, in 1971, we basically entered a period of increasing inflation after then. So people have this idea that gold and silver, are real stores of wealth. And yes, I would agree with that. But we're moving into an age where the issues associated with storing, transporting, storing, and providing security for your gold and silver, in the physical form, are increasingly challenging and increasingly expensive. And the other thing really is that, it's very difficult to exchange cross borders. You're only going to exchange locally with this, store of wealth and value. And the other thing to consider is that when you start looking at the gold contracts that are for sale, and there are lots of them, both ETFs, futures contracts, and crypto versions of gold, or gold wrapped crypto, whatever, they're only digital facsimiles. They do not tie to the actual product of gold and silver. So whilst in theory, you could say that, yes, it's a good idea, you don't have a tangible link. You don't own the gold. You don't own the silver. The opposite of that is true when it comes to Bitcoin, because providing you have Bitcoin on your own wallet and you have the private keys and the backup phrases to that wallet, then you have it. It's the equivalent of having, you know, cash under the mattress or gold under
Yeah,
the
yeah,
mattress.
yeah, yeah.
Got it on a hardware device.
Yeah.
Nobody can take that off you. There's no central authority that can restrict or regulate your access or your use of that wealth or that money.
Yeah. So the way I view that is, yeah, I totally agree with you about gold and silver. I mean, I know people that have got gold and they keep it in their freezer. You know, you've got to find somewhere to store it, as you say. And it's pointless buying a big nugget of gold, because how are you going to dissect that to spend should the need arise? So my take on that is exactly as you say, Donal. But if people are still wanting to do that, I recommend you go to secondhand shops, boot fairs, anywhere, get silver spoons, bits of gold jewelry. And that's the only way now that I would invest in gold, although I'm not doing that either. But yeah, it is just to get small pieces that can be used, you know, in an emergency. And we're only going by history. You know, essentially, I go from my research about the Second World War and the finances there. If you had gold and silver, you could still get bread. It's that simple. But we're not here to, you know, we're not being fearful here. We're just using logic and common sense. So, you know, Donald's absolutely right when he says that, you know, you're not even owning the gold. It's just a futures thing that may or may not materialize as real wealth to you. So, yeah. So you're saying then, we're saying, sorry, we're encouraging cryptocurrency as opposed to digital coins that we've touched on before. That's the way I see it all going.
Yeah, there are a couple of really crucial elements here, and you know, in order for a currency or for an asset to be useful, it has to be, you have to be able to divide it. It has to be divisible.
Yeah.
It has to be fungible.
Yeah.
And it has to be limited in supply. And all of these properties are, you know, hardwired into the Bitcoin protocol, into the Bitcoin blockchain. So in many ways, it is not only, you know, it's better than gold because it's divisible down to, you know, 100 million. You know,
yeah, and it's easy to store. And it's very easy to store and carry around if you want to.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
the beauty of it. And it's just absolute common sense, to be honest.
And it is limited in its supply to 21 million. We're at 18 and a half at the moment. So we're entering that phase where it will naturally increase in value because supply cannot be increased in the way that quantitative easing is constantly debasing the fiat currencies around the world. But so, you know, accepting that for what it is, it's an open source, decentralized system. So it's beyond the control of governments and banks. Now, there's a really important point here when it comes to digital currencies generally, in that the words Bitcoin, blockchain, crypto, decentralized have all really been conflated in the media. And there's an awful lot of confusion, and people are associating one with the other. And the characteristics that make Bitcoin the technology which has not just the potential, but actually is liberating people and giving them autonomy and financial sovereignty, the powers that be, if you like, are piggybacking on that, and they're hijacking that message as a means of presenting, you know, central bank digital coins. This is what they're coming out with. And somehow the public are, as I say, conflating this with the genuine nature of open source blockchain technology, you know, likes of Bitcoin. And there's a real danger because Bitcoin gives anonymity in the sense that you do not need to be tracked. You just need your wallet, and you appear on the blockchain as a node in the wallet. The miners do the mining, and it's all numbers, and that gives you freedom and sovereignty and individual responsibility. If we move to what the bankers are talking about, then we will have to have not just an app on a phone, but ultimately biometric, you know, nanotechnology
Yeah,
to
yeah,
verify who we
we
are and
are.
our ownership, and it's the ultimate surveillance.
Mhm.
So here we are at a knife edge, as far as I'm concerned, between the genuine emancipating, potential the genuine Bitcoin blockchain has, and the hijacking of that by the central banks and the governments to basically enslave humanity. And this is a real fork in the road, and it's never been more apparent than the decisions that we're being faced with at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that statement said it all. We are at a fork in the road. And I really, never in my life, on since I've been Hazel on the planet, have I um, taken note of this fork in the road. Which way are we going to go? But as individuals, collectively, yes, we're all in it together. But as individuals, we can step out of that collective consciousness. We really can. Now, that sounds like a paradox. We've got the collective consciousness, which means all of our thoughts, all of our emotions, all of everything together, one huge thought form. But those of us who are on the edge of the thought form, like Donal and myself, we're observing now that huge collective thought form. Which way is it going to go? But we've made our choice. Now, that seems like a paradox, but it's not, because we're still walking on the same pavements, same road, we're still breathing the same air and drinking the same water. But that, my friends, is how it works. If you want to get out of the system, you have to be in it and then get out of it and then observe the way it's going. And I know from my own experiences that it touches all of us. So I want to move on now, Donald, to scarcity, especially with us in the UK with Brexit looming, the rows that are going on between the French and the British, and what steps we can take without getting into panic, without getting into all of that nonsense, what steps we can take as individuals to help ourselves in the coming months and coming years, next couple of years.
Yeah, it's really important. If you're following the train of thought that has got us to here, and you can embrace to a degree, to an extent, that the authorities are not looking out for our better interests, and they do have another agenda, then what we have to do is to look at their own publications, their own speeches, to find out what's coming next, because they've laid it all out for us over the decades. None of what's going on is a surprise. It as you say, it's been, if you like, predicted in the dollar bill. It's been predicted in movies. It's been predicted in novels. You can go back and look at all of it. So now it's important to pay attention to what they're saying about what happens next. And the likes of Christine Lagarde, chairman of the International Monetary Fund, and Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, these guys, they've got their plans, and they're telling us, and they're giving us these clues. And one of the things it keeps coming up, and it's now being introduced into the mainstream media as a phrase, or as a kind of catchword, the Great Reset. They're talking about the Great Reset. Klaus Schwab published a book, which I think came out in June, called COVID-19, The Great Reset. Yeah. Now, that's pretty damn quick to get a book together if you had no idea that, COVID-19 was a thing, and that it, miraculously or somehow naturally took over the world from a bat in Wuhan. I mean, when you start listening to the official story, it's absolutely absurd. So anyway, the Great Reset is essentially designed to shut down the systems, shut down society, shut down the economy, and then to reboot it into the fourth industrial revolution. That is the subject of a previous book that Klaus Schwab wrote. Now, don't ask me who put him in charge, or why he's there doing what he's doing. It's all being done under the guise of philanthropy, and you'll find that being used by the big, powerful, wealthy global players all the time as some kind of justification for whatever it is that they're up to. But essentially what we're being drip fed, and we're getting warnings of it, are the idea that we could possibly be facing power shortages, where the grids are taken down by what would be blamed upon cyber attacks. And Klaus Schwab himself in speeches has been talking about, the need for increased internet security, how we could end up with a digital version of COVID-19. I mean, he actually said that. So there's the possibility that the power grids could be taken down for a period of time to cause disruption. This is what they're warning us about, but being blamed on cyber attacks. And it's a bit like, false flag. Well, it's false flag event. It's what would be called. Be blamed on some terrorist organization or some rogue state or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's just a means of advancing their agenda. So we've got that possibility. And yeah, I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm not going to say that it's absolutely inevitable, but I'm saying that they're giving us advice already.
Yeah. Can I just come in there and just say a little bit about the vibration when you mentioned that COVID-19 could be a digital disease, if you like. It's easily implemented because everything is vibration. COVID-19 has a vibration and it's all around the hertz. So, for example, 532 hertz, if you vibrate that sound through the computer, you will feel uplifted and you will feel good. It's the level of the heart and so on. So if they know the vibration of COVID, let's just say it's 20 hertz, for example, then they can channel that through the computer and that will trigger off low-lying frequencies within us. So essentially, without the science of it, that is how they can program us through a computer by using sound, the Fibonacci sequence, and all of that. This is not myth. This is true, and that's how possibly they would go about infecting people that way. Okay, so you've got to be really staunch in your core beliefs, really staunch and confident around what you believe for those lower frequencies to not affect you. And that's what puts people that are high vibratory beings out of the matrix more than anything. Does that make sense, Donal, how I've just got that over? Because I don't want it to sound woo-woo and,
Well, everyone's got their own perception on how it sounds.
Your smile says it all.
What is woo-woo and what is science? That's not a perspective that I had come across, but I'm well aware of the fact that their programming is being done through screens and has been done.
Yeah, that's how they do it. Yeah, the vibrate. It's the if you listen all music, and you're a musician, so you would know, the sound travels and it affects people.
It absolutely does.
Yeah, and the spoken word, and it is sound and, the vibration of it. So it's worth, getting onto YouTube and looking all of that up, and then you'll understand, simply put, people that have cancer, they vibrate to a certain sound frequency, and that triggers off in the cells of their bodies the cancer vibration, if you like. Measles has a vibration. Influenza has a vibration. Everything is consciousness and has a vibration. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I came to this subject from a scientific engineering background. I was doing an engineering degree at the time and started getting into metaphysics and looking at the holographic nature of reality and thought forms and energetics, manifesting in physical form. So yes, I mean, there's nothing that you said that I could dispute or would want to. When it comes to what the World Economic Forum's talking about, I believe that really what they're trying to say is that there will be some kind of, digital virus that affects things, through the power grid, through the internet.
Yeah.
And they're talking about taking it down. We've had insiders in the power industry, whistleblowers, talking about this plan. They've gone off the record telling us that there is something, being scripted for this winter. And when you start to see, and that's all well and good. And, we've heard disaster scenarios, prophesied many times in the past, but then you correlate it with your experience, of going into the shops, as you said earlier, going into the supermarkets and just starting to notice that, there's not as much food there, because one of the first things that would happen would be disruption to the supply chain, because everything is so tightly controlled in terms of stock and, computer systems. Obviously, if we had a problem, generators, for these big companies would only last so long, backup systems. And they've been warning us now about Brexit. They've been flagging it up. There's this deadline, and they're talking about queues at the ferry ports, and they're talking about disruption to the supply chain as a result of Brexit.
Yeah, this very morning, our Prime Minister is going over to Brussels, but they're talking about Kent, which is a huge county, being a huge car park for lorries because of all of the delays that, are going to come about if they, if there's a no deal. Kent will be a lorry park, and these lorries that bring our food, our vegetables, our fresh food, and so on and so forth from Europe, it's all gonna come to a huge standstill. And that's today, on the news today. And,
So, we're faced with this situation where we're in absolutely extraordinary times. The whole of this year has just been nuts, from the Australian bushfires in January right the way through the Californian forest fires. There's been a lot going on outside of the UK, which has been, crazy
for people,
in its own way. We've obviously had this pandemic pantomime, as I'm beginning to call it, and they're telling us that we're heading towards further disruption to our power grid and to our supply chain. Now, all of this might end up not happening. Of course, there's it's not set in stone. It's a possible outcome from where we are right now. And a lot of the decisions as to, that's down to a personal level. But most important, whether it happens or not, it's like the old adage of, in order to have peace, you prepare for war. If you have taken care of your own resources so that you're not dependent upon, the banks, the government, and so on, and then it's pushing everyone back to a grassroots self-responsibility. Absolutely privileged to be living in a part of the world where for a high percentage of the people, in rural Scotland, that is actually an achievable reality.
Yeah.
There has been a very obvious decision taken by people that live here because they've got access to resources. They've got access to ground, they've got access to food, foraging, the sea, and so on. And it's not by accident that a lot of people are here in a location like this, because it does afford us a degree of security from that point of view. So, that's where I'm at with it, is not depending on the powers that be.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. The grassroots responsibility, to quote you. And a lot of people that I know through the internet and so on, and personal, they're all looking to relocate geographically. Lots of people are doing that. Small, to the greater world, but lots of my friends and acquaintances are looking to move geographically, and they're really, really serious about that, so that they've got a piece of land, they can be off grid, potentially for a lot of their needs. Now, let's not, as you say and I say, let's keep balance. This may never happen, but I've never had a feeling ever before to be prepared for what is to come. And that is what I take note of, my intuition. So like Donal, he introduced me to the idea of getting a generator, of just having goods in the cupboard, non-perishable stuff, all of that, not going overboard, just quietly squirreling away things, that if, and it is an if, but things are pointing us into that direction. And when I fast forward a little bit, I can you could call this woo-woo, but there is only the now and the spacious present, I call it. Everything is happening now in the spacious present. That's what we've got. And you can go into the future with your feelings. And I can see me looking from the future saying, I'm glad I did that. I'm glad I did that from a place of serenity, autonomy, and common sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose I come at all of this from the perspective of spending quite a lot of time at sea over the years and sailing and skippering boats and so on. And you're constantly surrounded by hazards and danger. And, you know, you're looking ahead at weather forecasts and storms and so on. And keeping a weather eye on what's going on is exactly the mentality that I'm applying here. And of course it's possible to avoid bad weather. Of course it's possible to situate yourself in a, you know, to get out of it, to take refuge or to head in the other direction, or, you know, but it's about being in control. And if you don't have the means with which to control where you're going, what you're doing, and position yourself, then you're going to potentially end up being battered by something. And that's really where I'm coming to with this.
Yeah.
Of course I want to avoid all of this, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm prepared enough that if any of it happens, I'll have mitigated as best I can the consequences.
Yeah. And so there, how do we remain or get in control? We're talking about in control of our thoughts, in control of our emotions. And the fastest route to that I know of in all the years I've been teaching this stuff is to do conscious breathing. Deep belly breathing gets you centered and in control, but you have to do it moment by moment. So if you haven't found a way to get in control of all your wobbles, then I recommend conscious breathing. Make it not, I'm not saying going to say practice, it's just do it. Just do it. And it will flow out into so many areas of your life where once there was anxiety, where once there was depression and fear and all of that. Conscious breathing is the fastest route. And, you know, I don't say this lightly, but you can disregard a lot of the other ways that you might get centered or not, because your breath is much more than oxygen mixed together with other chemicals. Our breath is God itself. And when we recognize that, we realize that we're all one and that God, source, is ultimately flowing through all of us through our breath. It's astonishing what you can do physically when you get in control of your breath. So on that note, Donal, is there anything else that you would like to add to anything that we've spoken about today? You know, scarcity, money, being prepared.
I think the key thing is to, I suppose, if what we're talking about here, you know, piques your interest or causes a response of some form or other, is to very much do your own research, but also reach out to me.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to have a one-to-one chat or a deeper understanding, or, you know, for me to share my understanding about the practical things that we can do, because we are talking about practical things, but you have to be emotionally prepared first for whatever these changes may be. The practicalities, if you like, will fall out in the wash once you're emotionally prepared. So it is about having some of your wealth on a hardware wallet, Bitcoin on a hardware wallet, in cold storage, offline, kept safe.
Yeah.
You know, so if everything else falls apart, you've got something which, when, you know, the internet comes back on, you'll be able to plug in and transact with anybody in the world. There you have it. That's why we've got Bitcoin. That's why we're using Bitcoin. Even if all the lending platforms go down and the exchanges go down or whatever happens, you know, we've still got a certain amount of money on a hardware wallet. And beyond that, as you said, yes, just stock up the cupboards. Get some stuff in there that's not going to go off, that, you know, you can use next winter if necessary. Just getting away from this hand-to-mouth existence, having some reserves, having something to fall back on. And depending on your situation with regard to housing, yeah, you can buy a little solar pack off the internet for not much money, even if it goes in the window of your flat, that would be enough to charge your phone.
All right. Yeah, that's good. That's good to
Even
know.
without trying to power your mains or anything else, you could get a little solar panel that just goes up in your window, folds flat when you put it away, and you can charge LED torch, you can charge a radio, you can charge your phone, you can basically keep yourself functional and connected.
Yeah.
And that's not much, it's not a big deal.
That's really good to know, Donal, regarding, because we would need to be able to, because of the digital age we live in, to charge our phone at the very least.
Exactly.
So that is very useful information. So on that note, I would like to thank you again for having this chat. I really enjoy our chat. And regardless of everything we've said, there are many, many people that I know that have had a very good year. A very good year indeed, regardless of what's gone on out there in the matrix. So let's not dismiss that. My life is not filled with worry, doubt, and fear. And I know that Donal's isn't. And 2021 can be a very good year.
Absolutely. And I'll drink to that, Hazel.
Me too. Okay, so for now, lots of love to you and lots of love to everybody listening. And if you want to get in touch with Donal, what's the best way, Donal, for the people to reach out to you?
Just find me on Facebook, Donal Boyle.
Yeah, or find me on Facebook and mention Donal on me, and we'll be on it. Okay.